Let me drive the SWAT truck over here. Maybe. Reverse drive. Yeah, now I got that in your head. Does it beat them in 5 zones? Let us know when you think the knuckles quiet.
Okay, when you shut them down.
So what kind of antenna is that?
Where, which? This?
On the XTS, yeah. What kind of antenna is that?
That is the 136 to 148, I think.
Motorola OEM.
No, I know. Okay. I was asking if it was VHF.
It is VHF, but it's a little bit longer than the usual, 148 to 174 kind of thing.
Longer than the
Yeah.
next one up.
Since on CAP we're playing kind of both sides of the ham band on our VHF channels, slightly longer antenna. So.
It's interesting that you notice that. Not many people would.
No. What time is it now? My watch is acting funny.
I got one after.
One after? Okay.
So there you go.
One before. So we're right in the middle. All right. Okay.
There you go.
There we go. The robot says it's time to start. All right. Cool. All right. Well, thanks for coming to the presentation. It's a pretty good turnout. Hamfest is a good turnout, so it's good stuff. I got to stay within range of the camera there. We are recording the presentation. So anyway, thank you for coming. This is a presentation on Civil Air Patrol communications. Why are we doing this at a Hamfest? 1, to fill time. 2, most CAP communicators are actually amateur radio operators as well. Not always, but there's quite a bit of carryover, and of course the skill set is similar, and we all dig radio, and CAP we're playing with radio. So one of the things we will talk about, you'll notice it says no FOUO was harmed in the making of this slideshow. Does anybody know what FOUO stands for? CAP members accepted? Yes, sir.
For official use only.
Correct. And we'll get into that more in a moment. But bottom line, I'm not going to give away all the secret squirrel stuff here today. So, who am I? My name is Eric Schwarm, also known as N6RFI. I am the owner and operator of the N6RFI repeater up on Cactus Hill, about 10 miles north of here. In CAP, I am the Assistant Director of Communications for Colorado Wing, which is the CAP body within Colorado. I am the Colorado Wing Communications Training Officer. I've also at various times been the Director of Communications for the state, CAP, and I've been an Assistant Director for all of Rocky Mountain region. And outside of CAP, my radio experience started when I was about this tall, and I was a police explorer in the early 1980s and playing with scanners and police radios and thinking I was the coolest thing ever. So with that, also Mark Sheets here, K0FNL, will be helping me. And Mark, if you want to briefly introduce yourself.
Mark Sheets, K0FNL. Been in CAP a long time. I started out as a cadet. Got my pilot's license through CAP. So for any of you that have youngsters that have cadets, it's a great flying program. It's a great aerospace program. But enough about the commercial. About me, I've been a ham since 1983, and both Eric and I, and there's some others in here that have a master's rating in communications for Civil Air Patrol. I am the assistant engineering officer for Colorado Wing because the primary engineering officer left, so I guess by default that makes me the engineering officer. Also a communications officer for our local squadron, the Thompson Valley Composite Squadron, which meets here in Fort Collins.
All right, cool. And outside of CAP, Mark has also been very active in the past in Larimer County Search and Rescue, and he was communications officer for them in that role for a long time. So we talked a bit earlier, mentioned FOUO. The gentleman there was correct. It stands for official use only. It's not a classification like confidential or secret or top secret or some other such thing, but it is something that the Air Force tells us thou shalt not be talking outside of school about certain things. So for this presentation, some things I will not do and should not do is share frequencies that CAP is using, but neither VHF or our HF spectrum. I won't be talking specifically about call signs, and I won't go into too much detail about our repeater linking system that we use in Colorado. There are certain things that we're just asked not to talk about, and every year when we renew our membership, we've promised to follow those rules. So I'd be completely lacking in integrity if I talked about it here, and I'd be completely lacking in intelligence if I was talking about it while I'm filming. So for that reason, if you do ask some of those questions, I'll be nice and say, it's something I can't answer. But I will make a pitch for anyone who's interested to become a member, and then this stuff becomes shareable. So for those of you who may not know, what is Civil Air Patrol and where did we come from? Civil Air Patrol was created in 1941, and someone checked me on this. I think it was just a couple days before Pearl Harbor that CAP was actually created. And at that time, it was created as an auxiliary of the U.S. Army Air Forces. So Civil Air Patrol, now we're the Air Force Auxiliary, but we actually predate the existence of the U.S. Air Force. Back then, even in its original inception, CAP was doing things that continues to be done today, one of which was a cadet program that was mentioned earlier. So CAP is, most people know about CAP in the sense that we do aviation-related search and rescue and cadet programs, and those continue today. So as you can see on the screen, we have 3 missions now that are chartered to us by Congress. Congress created Civil Air Patrol as a congressionally chartered organization, very similar to Red Cross. There's only a few of those organizations that exist. American Red Cross is one of them. In that charter, Congress charged Civil Air Patrol with the 3 missions. Primarily emergency services is one that we're well known for. Cadet programs is another one that we're well known for. And in fact, some people who know about emergency services don't know about the cadet program, and some people who are heavily involved in cadet programs are barely or dimly aware that there's emergency services. And then the final program, and this is one of our missions, I should say, is aerospace education. And that is one that is not well understood, even by many CAP members. What that does in a nutshell is outreach and curriculum development for educators, teachers. If anyone in the room is a teacher or knows a teacher, they can get rides from CAP, orientation flights and planes, and they can actually get textbooks, full school course curriculum. That's not the purpose of our presentation today. I don't know all that much about the aerospace education side myself. Where I tend to live and breathe, and where communications tends to live and breathe, is the emergency services side of the house. So a little more about Civil Air Patrol. Currently, we've got something on the order of, I believe, 60,000 members nationwide. That's senior members, adults, and cadet members. There's a few other membership classes as well, but cadets and senior members are the primary that most people know and see wearing CAP uniforms. A year and a half ago, CAP was made part of the U.S. Air Force total force concept. So in that instance, when CAP is performing missions for the Air Force, we are members of the Air Force. We're not in the Air Force, but we're part of the total force and are actually honored to be called airmen when we're performing those missions. You see on screen, aux on, aux off. Civil Air Patrol is the Air Force auxiliary when we are performing missions for the Air Force. The rest of the time, we're a 501c3 nonprofit corporation. So, our average CAP member, when they're not actually on a mission, is not technically a member of the auxiliary at that moment. So it's kind of weird. And that will get into some weird stuff later when we start talking about some of the rules, what we can and cannot do with communications. Another thing here in Colorado is CAP is represented in the Colorado State Department of Military and Veterans Affairs. There is actually a Colorado Department of the Civil Air Patrol. And there's actually one full-time paid employee who works for DMVA and does liaison work between CAP and the state of Colorado. Colorado funds CAP. For some purposes, we're treated as a department of the state of Colorado. And that will play into communications a little later as well. Finally, in Colorado, Civil Air Patrol is the primary search and rescue agency for aviation searches. And where that would typically play out is an airplane has gone missing. Say it took off from Sterling and it was headed for Durango, never got there. and we don't know where it's at. So a search starts. In that instance, CAP is the primary state agency for prosecuting that search. Now it can get weird. If the search is located or narrowed down to a specific county, in that instance, under Colorado law, the sheriff of that county becomes responsible for that. So if all we've done is said we've triangulated ELT, the emergency locator transmitter, and we believe it's in Larimer County, at that point we call Larimer County Sheriff, and they can tell us, thank you, go home, or thank you, help us look for it. And both happen depending on the county and the circumstances. So our mission, this one, I apologize for reading from the slide. Yes, I see a question in the back.
Has that changed in the past years? Because I had a buddy years ago that used to do ground searches.
CAP does have some ground search teams, but again, in every individual county, if the search is narrowed down to be within county borders, the sheriff of that county is responsible. Now the sheriff may say, CAP, I don't have my own ground team, so would you help? But it would always be under the auspices of that sheriff's department.
The correct answer to that is yes, it has changed. Your friend who was very active as a ground team member, that mission has changed in Civil Air Patrol. Years ago, I started as a ground team member. We would do everything from locate the aircraft to body recovery, usually because the sheriff doesn't have the time to go in and do the body recovery. Can you guys do that? Yes, we can. We'll meet you down at the trailhead. That part has changed, but they still will employ a ground team, especially if they are on scene. They're a resource, so they can be asked to be used.
Okay. That was like 30 years ago. So.
Yeah, a lot has changed over time. Excuse me. I've only been a CAP member in my most recent retread experience for a little over 10 years, and I've seen a lot of change in that amount of time. You know, even the amount of search and rescue missions we do has declined dramatically. You know, now people have cell phones and spot tracker devices and such, and you know, to a large extent, it's taken the search out of search and rescue. We are still active in emergency services and doing more things to do, say, with disaster relief, and I'll talk a little bit about that later. Things we've done recently. Yes, sir.
I don't know if this should be discussed another time, but it's been my observation, just of how you guys operate, that you do not typically participate in search and rescues of persons, like that are missing on mountains or any of that.
It depends.
Can you explain why that, or at least you don't do it commonly?
It depends. Typically, say here in Larimer County, there's a very active and capable mountain-certified search and rescue team. They do their own searches. Occasionally, they will call us and see if we can do some overflights and see if maybe we see someone out in the middle of nowhere jumping up and down, waving a red shirt or something. So, but it's their mission. If they choose to ask us for our assistance to do an overflight or maybe radio relay work or something, that's their choice.
Do many counties have you do that? Like, does Alpine, SAR have worked with you guys at all?
Some counties do, some counties don't. I'm not conversant on which do and don't. You know, there's some counties we have a good relationship with. There's some that don't care for us, or you know.
There's also an increase in rotor wing units that are now able to go out and do the search and rescue for persons, because with a fixed wing asset, it's a little more difficult to do that.
Right.
So there's a lot more of that that's also been included.
I know sometimes for the real high mountain they use military anyway. That's
That's all right. But let's get back to to communications.
Related to that, Larimer County has called on CAP. I think it's been 4 times now, and CAP has located their subject 4 times from the air. So fixed wing, the fixed wing is not totally ruled out and ineffective for missing person searches. Now it helps when somebody lit the forest on fire, and that was an easy one to find. We found smoke and a guy standing at the base of the smoke that matched the description. But and the reason that Larimer County uses them so much is because myself and another CAP member were search and rescue managers, so we would kind of push it that way. And I think we have a stellar record with this county.
Yeah.
That's all I'll say about that.
All right, cool. And we'll move on because I want to get to the radio stuff here. I wanted to set the stage for why we have our communications program. But our mission within communications is really just to meet the validated communications requirements. And for our internal and external customers. Internal customers being typically our emergency services people. They're up in the airplanes or out on ground teams or what have you, and need to be able to talk back to mission base. But by the same time, or by the same token, the validation part in here is intended to drive a very focused and purposeful effort to what we do in our communications program, so that we don't have 52 wings of CAP members going off in their own direction. We've all got to be working towards similar means. So anyway, bottom line, what we're doing needs to be approved by CAP command staff and Air Force. Now, our purpose, this is really just gets into making sure that we provide commanders within CAP, incident commanders, mission staff people, the ability to communicate with their resources and to control them. In a nutshell, that's why we exist as communications assets, primarily on our VHF side. Now, regulatory stuff. One thing that a lot of people don't know is that Civil Air Patrol, as a function of the Air Force, our rules, our permissions to operate in the radio spectrum do not come from the FCC. And as amateurs, we're like, different rule set. But it actually works out differently, and some of it is more strict, and it's a little more challenging to understand some of it. So the National Telecommunications and Infrastructure Administration, did I get that right, NTIA? They are basically the FCC for the feds. And then they in turn give spectrum to the Department of Defense, which gives slices of spectrum to Department of Air Force, which in turn says, CAP, you get to play here, 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 and here. And we have to follow their rules, not FCC rules. So that can get really weird. In CAP, we have our own CAP rules, or regulations, which manage communications. DoD, Department of Defense, has some rules and regulations as well. And then, of course, there's NTIA rules that are in the Code of Federal Regulations that regulate what we do and don't do. Some of the weird things can be that our CAP aircraft are perfectly okay to operate on airband. That's kind of a no-brainer, right? Our CAP ground stations are not allowed to operate on airband. We're not permitted through NTIA rules. And then some of the other things that get weird is interoperability can differ between practice missions and actual live search and rescue missions. For instance, there are some aviation search and rescue frequencies intended for coordination between aircraft. We can only use those during live SAR missions. We can't use those frequencies during practice missions, which is kind of weird because you like to say you train as you fight. Well, we're not allowed to in certain cases because of the weird interplay between all the different rules, what FCC permits versus NTIA. Another thing that this does is that CAP cannot conduct our internal business on FCC-regulated frequencies. So where that can get weird is, one, we can't use amateur radio in any way, shape, or form as members while we're doing CAP missions. If we're going to talk to other agencies, we have to have specific agreements and coordinations in effect. Like 155, 160 megahertz is normally viewed as a search and rescue channel, but it's not a freebie. It's not a free for all. Everyone has to be licensed, and if we want to talk from our airplane to ground search and rescue team members that aren't CAP members, if we're going to use their channels, we're supposed to have memorandums of understanding in effect so that we can borrow their license, in essence, to talk to them. And then another thing that gets weird is FCC type acceptance on radios. Doesn't matter. NTIA doesn't care about FCC type acceptance. Generally, like most radios, that we use are Part 90 accepted, but NTIA doesn't care. They actually publish their own sets of rules about spectral efficiency and such, bandwidth requirements and all that, and rejection of neighboring frequencies. So if it says FCC Type 90 approved, doesn't mean it's okay for us. So it gets kind of weird. Something else that most of you are probably familiar with, MARS, Military Auxiliary Radio System, they actually have some exemptions that are spelled out in NTIA rules that they can use amateur equipment on some of the MARS frequencies. And for a long time, CEP members thought, why do we have to get the expensive radios? Why can't we use the ham radios like the Mars folks do? Well, I don't know how it came about, but Mars has a spelled out exception in the NTIA rules. CAP does not. And I mentioned earlier, we have our own regulations. So we have our 100-1 and 100-3, and feel free to scroll those down. Those are actually available online. You can Google them. There's some pretty interesting info in there. It's also some boring reading too, but they're out there. And if you're ever curious about what CEP does and how they do it, there's a lot of interesting info in there and some good resource information on how to operate nets and things. Yes, sir.
So do you guys license your members through, and I know it as NITA, but NTIA, for CAP?
I'm glad you asked, and I'll get to that in a little bit, but essentially we're not licensed in the same sense that an amateur radio operator is licensed, nor are we licensed in the sense that a police department or a fire department or something is licensed through. It's different. I don't know all the functional details, but I will talk in a little bit about how we train our members. Equipment, the good stuff, our toys. We got a lot of toys out there, a lot of equipment. This number varies over time, but this is published on our CAP national website. We've got 775 fixed HF radio stations nationwide. This is nationwide. If that was Colorado, I would be the happiest guy in the room.
I would, because we got to count once every year.
Yeah, at inventory time, that would suck grande. But nationwide, it gives us a lot of capability. So as you can see, 775 fixed HF radios, another 281 mobile HF radios, 339 transportable HF radios, and the list goes on. 457 fixed repeaters nationwide. Here, we're lucky to have most of them on mountaintops. Other people got them on towers and tall buildings and such. We also have, what's the number here, 46 portable repeaters. These are Motorola portable digital repeaters. It's a repeater in a suitcase that typically we can throw in an airplane, or we can put it wherever we want, but most commonly it's used in an airplane, which is the coolest, tallest tower ever. So we have, personally, I've put one of our repeaters in one of our airplanes and had it flying about 10,000 feet over Denver, and that gave us portable-to-portable radio coverage between Fort Collins and Pueblo, I think it was. So pretty cool when we can get the airplane up there and do that. Of course, it's good as long as the fuel and the pilot's bladders. In those cases, we have to arrange, so we don't just lose coverage. If we want to maintain coverage, we got to get another airplane up. They'll do a handoff in the air. Turn yours off, I'll turn mine on, and we continue coverage. It's pretty cool when we are able to do that. VHF radios. Okay, there is a mega typo there because it suggests we only have 25 fixed radios. That can't be right. Unless more of our fixed radios are pulled from the mobile fleet, which is pretty common. And it says we've got 3,820 VHF mobile radios.
That number is 2,500.
So, and then portables, 654. Then we've got generators. Yeah, that number's probably kind of fuzzy. And then 84 vehicles that are considered communications vehicles. The one you see on screen there, the Ford Expedition, we've got one of those here for our local squadron. It's HF equipped. We've got a couple VHF radios. We have an airband radio we can receive with. We've pulled the microphone once we learned all the rules about that. And in some cases, we also have installed Colorado DTRS radios, and I'll talk about that more. Let's see. Our land mobile radios are mostly EF Johnson equipment, both our portables and our mobiles. In our aircraft, we also have the Technosonics TDFM 136 series, which is a keyboard programmable VHF FM radio. All of our VHF FM equipment is equipped for analog, P25 digital, and we have encryption keys in most of them. Then we also, as mentioned earlier, we've got some portable repeaters that we can deploy and use as necessary.
Question.
Yes?
Encryption, are you able to communicate with all different agencies, police and fire, or just within?
That is an encryption key unique to Civil Air Patrol, and of course, this is in our VHF FM radios. For our interoperability stuff for other systems, we do not have encryption available to us. We have a project starting soon, we are told. We've already sent some people, Mark included, has gone to classes on how to program our upcoming generation of land mobile radios for CAP. And those are predicted to be the Motorola APX series, both portables and mobiles. Not the highest end, super coolest two-faced radio, but some mid-range radio, I believe. On the aviation side, this one, we don't have a standard. Our aircraft have whatever aircraft radio got thrown in there, whatever it was originally sold with, or whatever was replaced aged equipment. So on the airband side, that is just for the aviation stuff. We cannot use it for internal CAP company traffic. All that has to go through the VHF FM radio in the airplane by our rules. Look like you have a question.
That doesn't make so you can't use airband frequencies in the same way that other pilots are able to just talk amongst themselves.
Yes.
Oh, like the intercom stuff?
Air.
For safety, but that's aviation. That's not prosecuting the search.
Okay.
That may be just safety, like, hey, I'm here, I'm at this altitude, go in this direction, you're there, So safety, separation stuff, that's flight safety. That's not purely CAP company traffic or company business, if you will. On the HF side, our equipment is primarily Motorola / Mobat. I think Mobat's the company that made them, and Motorola put their label on them. So we're using the MyComm series radios. MyComm 2s are the most common. They are simply channelized radios. They are not frequency agile for the operator. They're just channelized. And then our MyComm 3s, which is newer to us, they're using ALE, or automatic linking establishment, and that is becoming more of the standard within Civil Air Patrol for HF communications.
Well, that would make
Yes.
sense if you were keeping up with the META stuff. A lot of the Mars is actually starting to use ALE as well.
Right, yeah. And CAP and Mars don't typically interoperate. So, they've got their program, we've got ours. There are some efforts, I understand, to have some sharing of capability and information, but that's not the norm at this time. So for us, we are, generally speaking, for over the last 12 years or so, CAP was concentrated heavily on upgrading all our equipment to the P25 capable stuff and replacing all our repeaters or fixed repeaters. We're only wading into the HF arena again recently, and HF is an increasing focus within CAP. So as new radios are purchased, they're ALE equipped, and we're working to train people on those. And then also, voice encryption is starting to occur on HF because there's many of the things we do have operational security considerations, and talking in clear voice is just not really, doesn't accomplish an operational security goal. Did you have a question, sir?
You running up the sideband on HF?
We're on the Fed side of everything, so it's almost always USB. I can't tell you frequencies, but USB is the norm.
The federal government runs all USB.
So on our operational side, when we're actually out doing our missions, VHF FM is our most common mode. That's what most CAP members use, and your average CAP member doesn't even know we have HF. On the communication side, that's where we're doing the long haul stuff over HF. But we don't have HF in our aircraft, at least most of them. It's a very limited number of vehicles that have HF in them. So it's really kind of a communications person sidebar. Yeah, what's that?
Toy meteor.
Yeah. So, but anyway, our average CAP member is familiar with VHF radio operations and doesn't know much about the HF side of things. In Colorado Wing, we've got a lot of repeaters around the state. It gives us pretty good coverage statewide for aircraft. Given the nature of the terrain, it's pretty spotty. Up along the Front Range, we've got pretty good coverage for vehicles and ground stations, but it's really intended to support primarily aircraft talking back to a mission base. In Colorado, because we are represented through the Colorado Department of Military and Veterans Affairs, we've got a sweetheart deal with the state in that we get to pass traffic over the state microwave system. So the majority of our repeaters throughout the state are actually linkable. We run in, that creates some great capabilities. It also causes some concerns because not all the repeaters are, many times they're using the same output frequency. And as you all know, if you get two repeaters talking at the same time, it doesn't work out very well, especially on digital where they can just cancel each other out and no one knows anything's talking.
Are you guys limited by, I had the impression that the spectrum, that you guys have a large amount of spectrum because the federal government regulates it, but are you limited by?
We are limited. We have a limited number of output pairs. And
really?
Yes. So, however, I will say that when those were assigned, they didn't envision these things all being linked together. So, if only one is firing off at a time, it's not a big deal.
But it's not.
We created a system that fires a bunch of them at once.
But it's not
That's a
real
problem.
easy to just get more. It's
No.
not like 5 more and just reprogram.
It's not easy.
To do that.
Nope. It's not easy at all. And in fact, it's pretty much set in stone, and it's probably going to remain the way it is for most of our lifetimes.
Wow.
That's my prediction. I don't have information on that, but
The upside to that for the casual user, when they find them all, they can scan them all. We don't frequency hop or anything like that, so we're easy to be monitored.
But where this does give us a lot of capability is the fact that, one, we can switch which ones are on at any given time. So if we have an incident commander running a mission out of Fort Collins, that IC can control assets out, say, in Grand Junction. And they sometimes do this with portable radio sitting in their kitchen at home. So that gives us some great capability. But if we're careless and just leave everything hot all the time, it can also create problems because obviously aircraft at high altitude, they can hear 5, 6, repeaters at once on a given pair, and that's going to create all kinds of problems for them on the reception side.
Have you thought about making a simul? Is it possible to make a simulcast?
We don't have the funds. That could probably be done. We don't have the money to do that.
Simulcast, I guess that would be a big project.
It would be a big project, and our budget is a big goose egg for that kind of thing. So.
Also, the equipment that we're running has been sundown. And
Sunset,
so
yeah.
We don't have the ability to go get the equipment to GPS sync all that for simulcasting.
When you say sundown, what?
No longer supported by Motorola.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Yeah,
like that guy.
our stuff. That's a personally owned radio.
No,
that's mine.
But
But
the STS, they technically no longer.
yeah. If I send that to Motorola, they're gonna be like, "Good luck," Yeah. Well, can we interest you in a newer product? You can get a better radio, but you can't pay more, right? So anyway, our repeater linking system does give us capability, but it also causes some concerns, and that's where we need to have radio operators and communications unit leaders who understand radio, not just someone who knows how to talk on one. So, continuing with operations, how are we doing on time, by the way?
11:30.
11:30. Okay, we're good. So obviously.
I'm enjoying this.
Okay, cool. Yeah. Well, I don't want to get between you and any of the prize drawings because I think 12:30 is the prize drawing. So even if I'm not in front of the door. So, and I'll be out there too. I bought a boatload of tickets. So anyway, operations. Obviously, for those of you who know what HF is, we're using HF for our long distance stuff. So we have radio operators who bridge from VHF to HF and vice versa. Where HF has worked well for us in the recent history is Hurricane Maria. I am told that the first radio traffic out of Puerto Rico for any federal agency was CAP. I think it was FEMA used us. I may be wrong on that, so don't quote me there. But that's what I've been told, is that we were the first CAP operators. They were the first ones to get up and running and get antennas back up in the air. Yes, sir.
When you said the operators linking HF and V, are you saying you talk to 2 mics?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. We don't have a gateway system other than the one inside somebody's head. So
it's a human gateway.
yes.
It's a store.
Fair enough.
Store unit brain forward.
We hope.
Yes.
If they're trained well, it's a store and forward. If they're not trained well, there might be some translation going on. So we obviously work hard not to do that. So we can use the HF for our internal traffic and for other agencies. Sometimes the joke in recent years has been that CAP is FEMA's Air Force. We've done a lot of work with FEMA. I have personally worked on exercises where FEMA did an internal exercise attempting to raise their regional centers. And those who didn't answer on HF, the traffic went through CAP instead. I personally sat at my office at work when I knew some traffic was coming and received a message over HF and drove down to Denver Federal Center to deliver a message to the FEMA director. And they were surprised. So we run national nets, regional nets, and wing nets on HF, and then obviously VHF is only suitable for the local nets. Colorado DTRS, I told you earlier I'd mentioned that. CAP does have some talk groups on Colorado's DTR system. We are not allowed to use them for internal traffic. Who remembers why that is?
You're not under FCC.
Correct. So we can use it for interoperability. Even though the state considers us a state department, CAP headquarters and NTIA take a really dim view of us, deciding who we are, deciding on which radio system we want to use. So DTRS is only permitted for our use for interoperability purposes. So our incident commanders, for instance, have DTR radios, and they can talk directly to sheriff's departments, search and rescue teams, and others who are on DTR.
So you're saying even if the state built you, built you a huge system, you could not use it for your own?
Correct.
Wow, that's weird.
Well, we are, for purposes of our radio communications, we are a federal agency, so we can't just decide which set of rules we want to follow. It's not the buffet where we get to go, this radio is cool, I'm going to use that one instead. So that does force some limitations on us from time to time, but that's the way it is. And also, the NTIA could also say, you know what, if you people aren't using the spectrum we give you, other people could use it. We'll take it away from you. That could happen. And that'd be really unfortunate. Say if Colorado, we're doing everything on DTR because it's available, and Utah, all of a sudden they lose their VHF stuff because we didn't play well with other children. And states that don't have an alternative system available would be hamstrung. Also, though, we send people to other places. We had some members of our local CAP squadron here who went to Texas after Hurricane Harvey and spent a significant amount of time down there. All CAP wings need to be able to talk to each other. When we show up in Texas, we got to know how to use the radios. And if we were using, say, a state-run system and we weren't fully trained and capable on our VHF stuff, we wouldn't be much use when they need us elsewhere. So we have some CAP talk groups, and we've given those talk groups to Larimer County Search and Rescue, for instance. When I was comm director, I gave them a letter, you can use our talk group. So now we can talk to them direct there for interoperability. And that's important because we're on VHF. Who else is on VHF nowadays?
Several counties, but not
Yeah,
huge.
not a lot. Boulder County is a good example, but
Clear Creek, Gilpin County, there's a couple others.
yeah, but there aren't a lot.
Counties.
So if we're going to talk to people and help them, if they call us for help, we need to be able to talk to them. DTR is how you do that in Colorado, for the most part. Yes, sir.
I was just going to mention as well the fact that we fall under the NTIA, we also kind of are only really borrowing all of our parent organizations. So the Air Force has reserved the right to use our frequencies anytime they want. And the DoD has the same right as well, that they can just come aboard what we're using and take it from us for whatever they really want to use.
Yeah, or just use it, not necessarily take it from us, but we get to share for a while, So, and we might not even know they're there. They may be encrypted and we never even hear them. So continuing with operations, airband, we talked about this previously because of an answer to a question, but airband is simply for aviation purposes. We don't get to use it for CAP purposes. Amateur radio. How does CAP interact with amateur radio? For the most part, we don't. But most of us CAP communicators are also amateur radio operators, and so we like amateur radio, and we like to play, and we've got equipment, but we aren't supposed to use it for CAP purposes. And that would actually be a federal agency infringing on amateur radio spectrum, which everybody would take a dim view of. Of course, our knowledge and skills that we acquire as being amateur radio operators is very useful to us as CAP communicators. And I routinely encourage CAP communicators to pursue an amateur radio license if they don't have one already. In fact, just 2 weeks ago, a guy who I'd been trying to convince for about 10 years finally pulled the trigger, and he's got his amateur radio license now. So slowly but surely I'm winning them over. So CAP cannot use amateur radio for our internal business. However, and this is something that even most CAP members don't know, we can use amateur radio as a served agency. So that doesn't mean that I can just put on a different hat that doesn't match my shirt and say I'm a ham now. But what I can do, and have done, is go to other organizations. And in fact, communications exercise we did in 2016, Rocky Mountain Ham Radio let us use their really cool trailer. The Aries organization right here in Larimer County, R3D2, and also the Mesa County Races folks out in Grand Junction. We were practicing how we could pass traffic from one side of the divide to the other. So we compared notes on how it worked with using CAP. We had aircraft daisy-chained up over the divide all the way until they could reach and see Grand Junction and get messages to them. We also passed traffic on HF through some of our other states back to Grand Junction and vice versa. And then the Aries folks use Colorado Connection to move, Aries and Races. They use Colorado Connection to move traffic both sides. And we compared notes, which was effective, and success ratio, and it was a really neat training exercise. But that is a way CAP can use amateur radio, and a way amateur radio can benefit Civil Air Patrol. So now, in answer to the question earlier, how do we license our folks? They're not technically licensed, but they're trained and authorized as radio operators. So we have an online system. So we have a website, CAP e-services, and there's a learning management system within there. And in there, we've got 27 total courses for communications. So what that does, these courses have video in them, they have online testing and so on, so everyone is getting a consistent training product. Now for our initial communications user training, what we call ICUT, people watch the videos, they read some of the slides, they take tests, and when they complete that successfully, then they go to an evaluator who does an in-person evaluation. So to prove that this person really knows enough to operate a radio and can demonstrate those skills. And we actually don't only quiz them on their knowledge, but we actually make them manipulate and control a radio. It could be either a portable or a mobile, but it's one of our VHF radios. So that is the entry-level point for CAP members to be able to use a radio without an immediate supervisor right there. Then from there, let's see, actually, let me talk about this. Our members also have to take an operational security course, and there's other courses available like how to use ALE, how to be a net control station, and so on. Something else I'll talk about, and Mark touched on this earlier, we also have an educational rating system, if you will, merit badges for communicators. So a communicator can earn a technician rating, not the same as an amateur technician license, just all CAP jobs have technician, senior, and master ratings. And most of us in the room who are CAP communicators are master rated. So, job ratings, this is where I wanted to go next. For missions, for anything that's an Air Force authorized mission or our practice missions, that's where we have additional certification, if you will, to do certain jobs at an incident command post or out in the field on a mission. For us, the entry point usually is a mission radio operator. Sometimes we'll let people start as a mission staff assistant and they work under supervision and help the radio operators with paperwork and running messages around within an ICP. But a mission radio operator is the initial certification where someone can operate CAP radios during a mission. From there, some, not many, but a limited number of the communicators will step up and earn what's called the communications unit leader. And that is simply the radio section supervisor, for lack of a better term. They roughly translate, and I don't want to compare them directly, but for those of you that are familiar with ICS jobs, mission radio operator is roughly a radio operator. And a communications unit leader, roughly in concept, operates in the same space that a CommL would operate in.
The ICS transition, I know that they have specific trainings for the ICS,
Mhm.
ComU and so forth.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's why I don't want to compare these two directly, because a communications unit leader is not the exact same as a ComL. A ComL is a higher aspiration for most of us who are communications unit leaders. But the function they're performing is roughly the same. Now, CAP has adopted ICS, but we haven't migrated all our jobs fully to ICS jobs. We also have classroom training, and that's one of my jobs as the communications training officer in Colorado Wing. I am putting on an OXCOM class. CAP recently struck a deal with the Department of Homeland Security Office of Emergency Communications, and we are now our own agency for the purpose of doing these classes. So that would make us roughly equivalent to a state. So like Colorado, there's someone who coordinates all those training classes. CAP can do their own now. And the one we're doing February 24th and 25th down in Centennial will be the very first CAP offering of any of the OEC classes. And for us, we're doing OXCOM because it's a good weekend condensed class that gets people thinking about planning and how to play well with other children and EOCs and such. So we're doing an OXCOM class in February. After that, I hope to put on a ComL or ComT class. I don't know which yet, but we'll see how OXCOM goes. And then,
What do those terms mean for those of us that aren't familiar?
I'm sorry, thank you for asking. OXCOM, the question was, what do these mean? OXCOM is Auxiliary Communicator, and it's a Department of Homeland Security Office of Emergency Communications course, so it's their curriculum. It's their class. They send instructors here to teach it. It's not us teaching it. So they'll send instructors here to teach it. And OXCOM is, for lack of a better term, it's a class that is targeted at amateur radio operators who work in support of sponsoring agencies. So oftentimes, ARES and RACES, people that are volunteering with sheriff's departments or fire departments or whatever to help with radio communications. So, auxiliary communicators. And those programs may differ in different places. Sometimes they're ARES or RACES. Sometimes it's a sheriff's department or fire department saying, we want you to do this. You're our helpers. You work for us in your volunteer time. The class is the basic curriculum for that. Colorado has some additional OXCOM training. We aren't offering that because we are not amateur radio operators in CAP, so the Colorado specifics aren't important to us. ComL is Communications Unit Leader, and that's someone who runs all the communications at an incident under the ICS program. ComT is Communications Technician. In addition, the other training we do within CAP for communications is we have periodic communicator meetings. We're required to have at least one a year. We try to do one a quarter and spread them around. We're not always real successful at that because people are busy, but we also do exercises, and this is where we really learn, the brass tacks. There are quarterly DoD exercises that CAP participates in. We don't advertise them, but usually you'll see them. Mars talks about them a lot. We're doing things at the same time the Mars operators are. We're also required to do an annual wing-wide or statewide communications effectiveness evaluation. And that's one I described earlier where we were working to pass messages across the Continental Divide without using internet or phone or any of that stuff. Some of you may be familiar with Colorado Vital Connection. They do these in many states, but Colorado participates. We are active participants in that, and that is an exercise where the military comes out and practices how to talk to civil agencies, and we play in that space as well, typically when we're invited, which we have been the last several iterations of that. And then, of course, as communicators, we support all CAP training missions. Anytime they're up flying, doing practice stuff, our communicators or our communication system is being tested. Of course, for them, it's an exercise. For us, exercise, live mission, really doesn't make a difference. We're doing the same thing. But that's where we get most of our opportunities to practice. Notable missions in recent years, Colorado wildfires. We are all over those, and follow-up. We're not up there when there's an air boss and they've got a TFR, temporary flight restriction up. We're not up there then, usually. But what we do is take public safety officials, roads people, whoever, we can take them up for flights with getting all the proper permissions. We can take them for flights. We take a lot of photos. We did the same thing after the big floods. I have been told we shot something like, shoot, do any of you remember how many thousands of photos? It was over 10,000. Yeah.
He was thinking 30,000.
Something like 30,000 photos that all got uploaded to the FEMA website, and then they're available to all the government officials who have a need to see what's going on.
Now, how many of those were of the photographer's knee?
Well, it was that many. That number is how many photos were published, not taken. Now, Hurricane Harvey, we had a couple CAP members from our squadron here and some from a little further south in Colorado too, went down and spent a week shooting photos after Hurricane Harvey. And I forget the number they said, but just this one air crew, I want to say, shot over 10,000 photos in the week they were there. And then there were many other air crews doing the same thing. Hurricane Maria, we talked about that earlier. And then, of course, we're available to local SAR agencies and other public agencies. We do charge for our time, but it doesn't cost much. So, where I will go with all this is for anyone who might be so inspired or interested, we are always looking for additional communicators. And as I mentioned earlier, amateur radio operators you know what you're doing. You've learned, you know how RF works, you know why radios can't talk from one side of the mountain to the other without something in the middle, unless you're doing some good NVIS. But anyway, we could use additional radio operators, especially as we expand in the HF space. That is something, as you know, or if you're an HF operator, you know you can't just throw an HF radio at anybody and expect success. Even with ALE. I mean, heck, ALE is supposed to take the propagation guesswork and calculations out of it, but functioning ALE on the radio is challenging in its own right. So, I'm sorry?
What's ALE?
I'm sorry. I mentioned that earlier. Automatic linking establishment. What that does is you take an HF radio or set of HF radios, and they scan a certain suite of frequencies and modes, and they listen for other stations that are sounding periodically. So then it builds, for lack of a better term, a routing table. I last heard, I'll make up a call sign. I last heard Flaming Monkey 5.2 on such and such frequency. And so if I want to contact Flaming Monkey 5.2, I'm going to go there first. Then the radio might start stepping up or down from there. Now the radios periodically sound at whatever interval they're set for. So as propagation changes, say if you sound once an hour or once every 2 hours, everyone that can hear will build that routing table and know where they have their best chance of getting a hold of you.
So basically, ALE is a HF-based mesh network?
Sort of. Yeah. Although mesh network will do additional routing beyond the two stations, but the concept is valid, yes. Excuse me. So that's HF ALE in a nutshell. There are other things that can be done with it. There's even short text messages that can be sent, stack messages in the MyComm world, but we haven't used that a lot. But what happens is you can have a radio sitting on a desk, just like this projector sitting here, and the radio operator doesn't even have to monitor it. So say we have someone on watch as a messaging station. They just wait for the radio to hoot and holler. It sounds an alarm. They know to go and answer because someone just contacted or did a handshake with their radio. So they don't have to sit by the radio, listen into a headset through all the atmospheric noises and such. They can wait for the radio to ring, for lack of a better term, and go answer it. Yes?
So what's it actually take to get involved with the CAP?
Well, there's my contact info on screen now. Perfect timing.
What kind of requirements?
So what we do, one, we ask that people would come to a couple meetings to check out the organization, see if it's a good fit. And typically we also have a membership committee when someone wants to join, make sure that they're a good fit for us and that they don't give us the heebie-jeebies. They don't look like some freak, that's on wanted posters. Well, we were going to talk about that later, Theo. But anyway, so there's that piece. But then basically what's required is a basic an application process, and I believe it's $60 to our national organization, $30 to our local squadron for an annual. And then part of that application fee is you have to get a fingerprint card, and a brief background check is done at the national level. We can't take people who are convicted felons or have a history of child abuse or things like that, obviously. Beyond that, if you decide to become a member, we have what's called our Level 1 training, which is you go through some introductory, this is CAP, a little bit about our history and our organization as it exists today, why we wear funny outfits and things like that. Part of that includes a basic operational security class. And then from there, once you've completed that Level 1 training, now the rest of CAP opens up to you, and you can choose what kind of things you want to do. So with that, you could, say I want to help with the cadet programs, or I'm here for radios. Eric convinced me this is the coolest stuff ever. So at that point, we would get you connected with someone who works in the field you're interested in. So for communications, you would work with one of us in the room here, CAP folks, and we might work kind of like a mentor-mentee relationship. At that point, we'd tell you, start taking these classes and get those done. And then for the jobs in emergency services, you actually have to work kind of almost like an internship. You have to work a couple missions and be evaluated in a list of tasks to prove you're competent. And then there you go. So that's it in a nutshell. It can get more advanced, but that's the basics. And I think this gentleman had a question first.
That's outside of radio, but with CAP, is there a place for my granddaughter, 12-year-old? 12 years old is exactly when you can start being a member. And the cadet program here, I'll ask Alex in the back of the room. He works with the cadet program. I believe, I'm sorry? Oh, okay. Okay, so the local meeting wouldn't work well for you, but CAP exists in every state, and what I would encourage you to do is to go to civilairpatrol.com, I think it is. Yes, that is the entry point. Yeah, 12 years old is when we start accepting cadets, and they can stay in the cadet program until 21, or they can bridge to a senior member if they want at as early as 18. But the cadet program is targeted at that age group. Yes, sir.
Where and when are your meetings?
The local squadron here, the Thompson Valley Composite Squadron, meets at the Life Point Church in Fort Collins. I don't have the address off the top of my head.
900 East Prospect.
Thank you. 900 East Prospect. And the meetings for adult members, senior members, are the first and third Thursdays of the month at 7 p.m. First and third Thursday of each month. Life Point Church. 900 East Prospect, was it? Okay.
What time?
7 o'clock p.m. for senior members. Now, if you have someone who's interested in cadets, I'll let Alex speak to that.
That's you.
Got to wake them up. I believe they meet every Thursday. Is that still correct?
Yep.
Okay. So, how are we doing on time? I know I had a time warning a while ago.
We have 1.5 minutes of recording time left.
Okay.
And about 2 minutes left on the clock.
Okay, perfect. So, are there any other questions before we wrap it up? If not, thank you for coming here today. If you have questions, feel free to contact me. My email address is on the board, or catch me in the hallway after we're done here.
Are you going to be running for a couple minutes?
Yes.
Okay, 'cause I have some.
Okay, thank you. Have a good day, and good luck to all of you at the prize drawing. Unless it's the raffle, because I want all the luck to go to me.
I'm Nate Randall. So, I don't volunteer with Flight.
Okay. Okay. Well, you mentioned that.
So I listen to scanners.
Okay.
So I'm
Are you a former CAP member?
Yeah, the Bountiful Utah Composite Squadron Cadet Commander.
Oh, okay.
Back in the 70s. But
Oh, wow, okay.
There's a lot's changed.
Yes.
Since then, I've gone on and done other stuff. Time to get back in. So.
Well, are you here in the Fort Collins, Loveland, Greeley
Just moved
area?
back to the area, so
Okay.
I'm in the process of getting jobs and housing and stuff. So yeah. But
Well, definitely pay us a visit.
it'd be always fun to come out and just say hi and see what's going on and involve
Yeah, I was the commander of the local squadron for a couple of years. I took that to get out of being communications director because I did not like inventory. The Air Force inventory people have no sense of humor, and I got tired of playing in that space.
Back in the 70s, my call sign was up on Mike 45, but that was a long time ago with Radio 2.
Yeah, I think they just changed it. I forget what the Colorado or Utah call sign is now. I think they just changed it.
Oh, I'm sure everybody's changed.
But
anyway, I'll have to stop by. What is TV?
TVCS is our local squadron, Thompson Valley Composite Squadron. So if you search online, you'll find it too. But
I got enough connections here.
but okay.
See if I can show up on the meetings.
Yeah, so like I say, first and third Thursday. However, February 1st, I think, is the first meeting in February. But we're having a formal dinner that night at a country club, so we will not be at Life Point Church that night. So I'm glad. Yeah, so I'm glad we talked about that. Otherwise, I'd had a fleet of people showing up at a meeting that we're not there for. But
okay.
I thought I was turning this off.
Like it'd be kind of fun to get back involved.
It's enjoyable.
I had a ball. I enjoyed it. I was 18. So.
Fantastic. Well, cool. All right. Yeah, I know. My first stint in CEP is when we were flying pterodactyls, so you know. You look like a man with a question.
I enjoyed your presentation.
Thank you.
Jeremiah.
Eric Schwarm.
Yeah. I wrote down your information, but I was going to ask, because I've been interested in working with communications with you guys for a while.
Mm-hmm.
Only problem is I don't know where to go
My dad and I were flying this mission.
for finding a communications wing in the Denver area.
Okay. Typically, we don't have communications squadrons. Everyone, we're all just in a local squadron, and then you just got to find one that's a good fit for you. But then, as you get involved, you get started with the squadron, but then you just start working with communications stuff. A lot of squadrons are looking for communications officers, which I wouldn't recommend doing that. Like your first, hey, congratulations, you're a member, you're a comm officer. You want to learn some stuff. Some squadrons will do that to you, and I would say thank you, but no, I want to learn stuff first, because as a squadron comm officer, you're responsible for any equipment on their inventory. So you don't want to get thrown into the asset management stuff right away. My personal opinion, of course, but I'm not too familiar with which squadrons in Denver would be close to you,
Since I live out in Aurora,
there's a Parker Cadet Squadron, I think it is.
There's actually another one that's actually out at the just down 70 from me. At the
Okay. Now, where it can get weird, though, is some squadrons do emergency services, some don't. So, generally speaking, if it's a cadet squadron, they don't do much with ES. And ES is where you want to be if you're going to play with comm.
National Guard off of 70.
Buckley Air Force Base?
Close to it, yeah.
Okay.
It's at the Front Range Airport.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So, anyway, I would say, actually, I'll ask Mark if he knows, but I'm trying to think of which squadrons out there are kind of active with communications. Some will bubble up over at times, and then others, fizzle. Some are never involved. So, gosh, I wish I could think of one. What I would recommend is do you have a pen on you by any chance?
National Traffic System.
All right. Scroll your email address on here, or send me an email. Send me an email, and I will get you in touch with someone who's from that area who would be able to tell you who's a good communications group.
That'd be perfect.
Okay, cool. So my speaking notes that I didn't use.
Normally I have a card that I give recruiters from Engage on.
Yeah, I try not to carry business cards because I'm just my job titles have changed so many times in CAP. It's like I give up. So I throw out my email address and say call me or contact me. So, but that's my recommendation. I'll get you when you send me an email. I'll get you information on which squadrons down there are stronger in communications, and that would be a more enjoyable, fun place to start. The only one I can think of off the top of my head is the Black Sheep Squadron that meets at Centennial Airport.
I know right where that's at. Yeah.
So they tend to have people interested in communications, But it's possible I'm missing another group, and I'm just not thinking of it, and I don't want to give them a short shrift. So I'll get in touch with someone who's from that area who can give me a good answer.
Right. Yeah, I've been reading about you guys, and I've been on your national site a couple times. And with the fact you guys are part of the Air Force, I can understand why the site's so hard to navigate now.
I don't know that everything worked great.
Take time.
All right, thank you. So, to some degree, we're a huge organization with a lot of bureaucracy that not a lot of people pay attention to. So, sometimes it's just chaotic because we're not full-time paid employees or anything. It's hard to keep. It's herding cats. So there are times when, there's some of us, and I tend to be, even though I'm. If you're familiar with Myers-Briggs, I'm an INTP, heavy on the P side. It's like I am ultimately flexible. I hate structure, yet institutionally, I work really hard to create structure, and so I'm sometimes frustrated by the lack of it in our overall organization. The national website, I don't think we can blame the Air Force for that.
Right.
I think the chaotic nature of it and the fact that it sometimes takes you out to other websites, I think it's just everyone going off on their own journey of self-actualization. Excuse me.
Originally, before the Air Force redid their mill site, it was a mess.
Was it?
Yeah, it was a horrible mess. No, I've been, like I said, looking around, and it's like I just can't find anything that says communication.
Yeah, and that's a factor that we don't have a communication squadron. I've envisioned that over time and thought it would be cool to create one and just say, hey, everyone statewide who wants to play communications, let's just create a communication squadron. And but that hasn't happened. But it would be pretty cool if we could all be in the same place and do the same thing, and really focus on training, and the best equipment gets assigned there because it would be used everywhere. But that just hasn't happened. It's not typically how it works in CAP.
Yeah.
But it also makes it hard for someone like you to find, I want to play with Comm, where do I land?
Yeah.
With me, I joined CAP specifically to do communications, and it turns out that our squadron was pretty strong in it, so it worked out well. But that was just luck. There's other people who wind up in a squadron and they struggle. There's no one in their squadron that does ES, for instance. So that means there's no mission radio operator there who can mentor and train them and sign them off. So that becomes a challenge. So that's why you want to find the squadron that's the right fit for you.
Yeah, and that's it's something I've been striving to focus on is some MCOM side, which is ham radio.
Yeah.
They're in that route, and out of everything, I was thinking about joining areas, but then I got to the point I'm like, most of the areas are close enough. They're still, how can I put this? Other than B carriers in the area and a couple other areas down there, they really just haven't got their.
There's some groups are strong, some aren't. Now, one thing that recently in Colorado, are you familiar with the Oxcom law?
Are you familiar with Nick Meacher?
Who?
Nick Meacher.
The name is familiar, but I don't know why.
Heads up the Patriot VE team.
Okay.
He's one of the Oxcom instructors for the state of Colorado.
Okay.
So I've actually been talking to him about putting on a class.
I see. Cool. But so you're familiar with the laws for credentialing and stuff for amateur radio communications in Colorado. The Oxcom group has become the umbrella organization to oversee that and create requirements. Since CAP, we're not operating as amateur radio operators. That does not apply to us. So the things I described in the class, that's it. The Colorado Oxcom is interesting to us, and those of us that are also hams and active in ARES or RACES or some such thing, that credentialing will apply to us in that space, but not for our CAP work.
Right.
So.
Well, does FEMA credentialing at all work with you guys at all?
We are entirely self-contained right now with, the mission radio operator qualifications, the comm unit leader qualifications. That's it. We start and end there. Now, I'm told that there's some things in progress or in development, so that, say, for instance, our communications unit leader would turn into a 3-tier system, and the top tier would require that you also be rated as a FEMA system COML.
Gotcha.
So right now we only have one level. Yours communications unit leader, and whether it's a single, it could be a single responder incident or an area command incident, and we don't have a different rating for working those things.
Right.
So they hope to expand that in the future, but I don't know where they're at with that.
Yeah. It's, I mean, just for fun, going through some of the FEMA stuff and the ICS stuff. It's really.
I'm sorry, I'm interrupting. Go ahead.
No, feel free.
Something I did not touch on during the presentation, I wish I had, is that we do require, for working in the emergency services space, all our members have to get the IC 100, 200, 7, and 800. To be a communications unit leader, I had to get the 300 class, and since I'm also rated as a public information officer, I had to get 400. So that's like the last thing that it's hard for a lot of our folks to get. But so when I say we stop, start, and finish on the radio side with our own internal training, but we do participate and we do require certain FEMA classes. So now we're terrible about using the same terminology as FEMA and the fire world. So when I talk to people about what do we call our mission base, well, you're not supposed to call it a base because that has a specific meaning under ICS. So our implementation of ICS is still challenged. We say we do it, we don't do it well, in my opinion. And we don't even use the right terminology, which is one of the most fundamental parts of doing ICS. So,
using common English for ICS.
And what gets weird is, and pardon me, I'm going to start grabbing stuff to put things away while we're talking, but I'm still listening.
It's actually
okay. So it's our implementation of ICS is a little challenged, and we also struggle with people just following our own rules. On the communications side, we use military-style communications protocols, pro words, things like that, and getting our people to use those is challenging and maddening. Most of them, they don't want to be radio people, because most of our people who are using radios aren't communicators by definition. They are people with a mission to do. So getting them to use proper terminology is sometimes a challenge. And for those of us who are radio guys and gals, we're like, oh my gosh, we're rolling our eyes at some of the stuff we hear on the air. And so it can get interesting. But, unlike Mars or Ares or ACES, where everyone on the air is trained, ours are trained, but not to that same kind of level. So.
Yeah, I have a feeling on
They're
that.
one of the few that has a really nice concept in their head. They've got full concept.
But it sounds like, with your experience and interest, that this could be a good fit for you if you find the right squadron that supports you in that.
I've been dying to sit down and
then there's
I've had it. Interest in aviation for years.
Okay. Now that's something I did not talk about during the presentation, but even if you're not a pilot, you can get in the air. You can be a what's called a mission observer or scanner, which sits in the back seat and you help run the radios, take notes, and look out that side of the plane. You sit behind the pilot because we don't want the pilot looking at the ground. We want them flying. Then the next level up is mission observer, sits in the right front seat, runs the radio, actually controls it, works with some of the navigation stuff and the radio direction finding equipment, and then another job in the air for a non-pilot. I mean, pilots can do it too, but is aerial photographer.
You're talking I love photography.
So I've been rated as scanner, observer, and aerial photographer. And then when I was squadron commander, my job was to help everyone else realize their dreams. So all my certifications expired in that space, and I've just stayed in communications.
That was the other thing I was going to ask you. So is there? So for my IT certifications, I have a 4-year run. I got to retest that. Is it the same way?
Yes, most of our qualifications, they're on a 3-year recycle. Yeah. So and that can be weird because some of our Smart folks, they get their mission radio operator certification, then they don't touch a radio again. 3 years later, like, hey, time for me to re-up, and you work with them, and it's like they don't know what they're doing. So, that's one thing. I was guilty of this when I first joined CEP. That I was all over. I did public affairs, I did communications, I did ground team, I did urban direction finding, I did aerial photographer when it came out. I learned the air stuff. Well, you reach a point where you can't keep them all current and have a life. And so when some of my stuff started expiring, I'm like, let it go.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I've done that with some of the stuff, and then now I'm just, like I said, I was looking for something of interest, and I started reading.
Pardon me while I do something on my phone. I just realized I'm still recording.